Welcome to Week 7 of the President's Athletic Conference Football Focus. I'm Waynesburg University senior Andy Stanko, and this week our focus shifts to the Carnegie Mellon University Tartans. CMU started its season with a 2-3 record for the second year in a row. The Tartans hope to replicate their end of the 2015 season, in which they won their final 7 games, including an ECAC Bowl championship. Each week, the PAC Football Focus features one team from around the conference. We'll take a look into the program and highlight Saturday's matchups to get you ready for the weekend with the PAC Pregame Show following the Football Focus. 2 other Waynesburg University students and I will break down every matchup involving PAC teams in Week 7. Coach Rich Lackner has been at the helm of CMU's football program for 3 decades. He was part of 2 PAC championship teams as a player for CMU in the 1970s and shared a PAC title as a co-champion as a coach in 1989. The Tartans rejoined the PAC in 2014 and have finished behind perennial powerhouses Thomas More and W&J in both years. Last year, Coach Lackner mentioned Thomas More and W&J as measurement games, in which he could see how his team stacks up against the very best. He's not too far off in 2016. CMU lost to the Saints 20-16 and to W&J 55-52 in double overtime.
Based on the results, I think we're close. Both those teams have a whole lot of tradition and a whole lot of wins over the last X number of years, and teams in those situations find a way to win, and they did. And so I have to give credit to those coaches and those programs for their wins over us. I think we're kind of banging on the door. We're real close.
After seeing his team compete with Thomas More and W&J through the early part of the season, Coach Lackner points to consistency as the key to joining them in the top tier in the PAC.
You want consistency. You certainly don't play just for those 2 teams every year. I mean, that's kind of foolish. They're a measuring stick because of their history. What I have found over the last couple of years in the PAC is that there's a whole lot of parity and a whole lot of good football teams, and certainly every week's a challenge. Taking that next step is pretty simple. I think it's not only playing well against those type teams, but it's finding a way to pull out the wins against those type teams. So, am I pleased with our guys' efforts? Absolutely. Our execution has to be a little better against teams of that caliber, and when that comes, I think that the wins will come with it.
Coach Lackner is no stranger to the PAC, having competed as a player and coach in 3 separate decades. He finds the competition in conference play second to none.
I think the level of play is incredible. Every week brings new challenges, and that's what makes our job so interesting as coaches, because you come out of a game on Saturday either with a big win or a disappointing loss, and you're back at work on Sunday morning getting ready for the next opponent. I just think that the coaching at this level is excellent. I think the talent level is excellent. There's a lot of good football teams in the PAC. Certainly, we don't have to take a backseat to any conference in the country.
It's impossible to speak about CMU without mentioning Division III's leading rusher from last season, in junior running back Sam Benger. Every opponent has to account for Benger, but Coach Lackner stresses balance in his offense.
He's not a secret. He led the nation in rushing last year. So, I mean, if I was a defensive coach or head coach and playing against Sam, I'd have to focus some attention on him, certainly. If teams choose to do some things to take Sam away, then you have to have an arm at quarterback, and you have to challenge them with the throwing game. And I've been proud of our quarterbacks and their abilities to hit open receivers and become a pretty balanced offensive football team this year. And so we have to have that balance if we expect to be able to run the ball with Sam. And if they take him away, you have to have the ability to throw the football.
Injuries at the quarterback position this season has been a storyline all year, with starter Brian Jangro missing some time and backup Alex Klein taking a significant number of snaps through the first 5 games of the season.
Well, Brian's had some injury, and certainly when he's gone down, Kleiner has stepped up and done a fine job. I think the play at the quarterback position overall has been solid. Whether it's Brian or Alex, and I think both have shown to be good quality quarterbacks.
Carnegie Mellon was one of 5 PAC teams getting votes in the Division III Top 25 poll before the season started. The Tartans have started 2-3, like in 2015 where they won out and claimed an ECAC championship for the PAC. Coach Lackner looks for a repeat performance.
Well, the first thing, looking back at last year is the fact that we happened to be 2-3 at one time, but originally we were 1-3. We felt that the 3 teams that we lost to were all quality football teams, and that we had the ability to win the rest of our football games, which we did. This year we're sitting at 2-3, and the 3 losses were losses not only against excellent football teams, they were very, very close losses. 1 overtime loss, a double overtime loss, and a 4-point loss to Thomas More. So we have nothing to be ashamed about in terms of our record at this point. And our message to our kids is we continue to believe in them, and we continue to think that we are a good, strong football program, and we are going to approach every game one at a time. And we feel that if we play the game that we're capable of playing, we can be in every game and have an opportunity to win every game.
Defensively, the Tartan pass rush stands out. CMU leads the PAC in sacks with 21 through 5 games, and senior defensive lineman Brian Corey leads the PAC with 8 sacks of his own.
Well, Brian's a veteran defensive lineman for us, and he's mastered his techniques very, very well. And he's seeing a little more double team this year because, again, he's no secret, and that opens up opportunities for other defensive football players, whether they'd be the defensive line, or if we do pressure with some linebackers, it opens up opportunities for them as well. So team game, and we hope we can continue to pressure quarterbacks in this league because they certainly are a talented group.
With Benjer and Corey getting so much attention on either side of the ball, other players have opportunities to make plays, and Coach Lackner singled out his wide receivers in the Tartans' most recent game against W&J.
I think this past game, the group of players that kind of stuck out to me were the wideouts. I think that they had an incredible football game. Matt Forjan got us great field position on Kleiner's first play through a streak route down the sidelines, and Matt caught it one-handed inbounds, and it was just a great football play. And we just had Tommy Mansfield made a great catch. Johnny Prather has been consistent all year with his ability to get open and catch the football. And Franzon has done a wonderful job. So as a group, I thought that they really raised their level of play last week against W&J, and really gave us an opportunity to be competitive and have a chance to win that football game.
In matchups against Thomas More and W&J, CMU played 2 very different football games. The Tartans nearly beat the Saints in a low-scoring affair, and nearly beat the Presidents in a shootout. Coach Lackner points to matchups dictating the styles and results of those games.
Those games come down to matchups a little bit. W&J, has a quarterback that, the young man's had a wonderful career at W&J, and my hat's off to him. He's had a phenomenal career and had a great game against us, and their receiver had a career day against us as well. And so it turned out to be, one of those games I kind of term a track meet. It was up and down the field, and both offensive coordinators, I think, can be very gratified with the fact that they were able to put up so many points, and both defenses had difficulties stopping the opponent. And it was just one of those games. You see them on TV sometimes, and you sit back and you say, Stanford USC game ended 10-7, and then the next week Stanford played Washington. The score was 63-61 or something like that. Sometimes it comes down to matchups, and sometimes they work in your favor, sometimes they don't.
This week, Carnegie Mellon travels to Beaver Falls, Pennsylvania, to take on Geneva at Reeves Field, where they're 2-0 this season. The Golden Tornadoes have a completely different offense than what CMU saw last week against W&J. Coach Lackner talked about the challenges for preparing for Geneva's triple option attack.
Well, the challenge you run into in defending that type of offense is the ability to mimic the offense with your scout team during the week of practice, and that's a very difficult thing to do. I think Gino's to be admired for the way that his kids have come along, and they've competed very well, and they appear to be getting better every week. Certainly, it's not something you see every week, and it's something that's a little bit different, a little bit new. Football is still blocking and tackling, but it does present some challenges in terms of trying to mimic that offense as you prepare for it.
Again, the quarterback position for Carnegie Mellon is in question heading into Week 7. Brian Jangro started last Saturday's game against W&J, but sophomore Alex Klein had to finish the game for CMU. No matter who lines up at quarterback, Coach Lackner has faith and believes his team does as well.
Well, it's hard to say. We'll see how Brian comes along. If he's ready to go, great. And if he's not ready to go, then Alex will be there. And whichever one's under center is the one that gives us the opportunity to win. And I know that we have confidence in both quarterbacks, and our kids have confidence in both quarterbacks. So whichever one's under center is the one we're going to go with, and we'll give it a best shot.
Finally, it's year number 3 for CMU in its second stint in the PAC. Coach Lackner said that he looked forward to the rivalries, but they're not quite there yet.
Well, I think those things happen over years as opposed to over a year or two. I think that being in the PAC, this is our third year, where we played a full PAC schedule with 8 games and that type of thing. I don't know that those things come along after 3 years, but once you get into year 4 or 5, that kind of thing, you have freshmen who play a full complement of games against all those various opponents type of thing. I think that's when you start to develop more of a rivalry, and when you start to win consistently and you're up there in that upper tier of schools, I think those rivalries come.
Thanks to Rich Lackner and Carnegie Mellon University for being featured on the PAC Football Focus. Up next week is Teal College and head coach Dan Bloom. Stay tuned for the PAC Pregame Show coming up next on pacathletics.org.
I'm Joe Underko, Commissioner of the President's Athletic Conference. Want to know what makes the PAC so special? Here's a few reasons why.
Comprised of 10 private institutions and 2 affiliate members, the PAC remains unique in this era of high-pressure college athletics. Now sponsoring 21 sports as it celebrates over 60 years of competition, the PAC is regarded as one of the elite NCAA Division III conferences in the nation. Our student athletes excel in athletics as well as the classroom, with numerous postgraduate scholarship winners, over 150 academic All-Americans, and over 900 academic honorable recipients with a 3.6 GPA or higher in the past year alone. Want to learn more? Visit us at www.pacathletics.org or follow the President's Athletic Conference on social media.
Academic and athletic excellence since 1955, the President's Athletic Conference.
Welcome to the PAC Pregame Show here on pacathletics.org. Andy Stanko with you, and today I'm joined by fellow Waynesburg University students Donny Chedrick and Brendan Keany. And guys, before we jump in to this week's slate of games, let's take a look back at last week's results, and I'd say they were rather expected. We had 4 matchups where teams with a significantly better record, teams at the top of the conference, beat some teams towards the bottom of the conference record-wise, and the only exception being Waynesburg over Geneva in a 10-9 football game. So anything stick out from last week in terms of the results that we saw?
Well, nothing really stood out to me. Waynesburg defeating Geneva, that was a good victory for this Yellow Jacket team on homecoming. But something that I mentioned my first week on this show, that was a few weeks ago, I know, but I mentioned the tough October schedule that was upcoming for the St. Vincent Bearcats. And so far, 2 weeks into October, and the October record for St. Vincent is 0-2, and neither game was very close. A loss at Case Western, where the Spartans won pretty handily, And that was a game that St. Vincent led 14-0 early.
Mm-hmm.
And then last week, Westminster flexed its muscle against the Bearcats, winning 37-22. So St. Vincent kind of back down to earth after a 4-0 start.
And it's not over for St. Vincent.
No, you got Thomas More coming up. Now, that's a home game, but Thomas More, arguably the best team in the PAC, and then traveling to W&J to face the best offense in the PAC. So still 2 games left in October. St. Vincent gets this bye week to sort of rekindle
at
things.
At Case and at Westminster, that's not an easy draw. The Bearcats, of course, off this week. Brendan Keany, what's up?
Yeah, I got 2 things that I noticed from this past week. Thomas More, I think you led me right into it, Donnie. They are playing some outstanding football. 50-point win over Grove City, 70-20. And the other game that I want to point out, what a barn burner we had at W&J. The Tartans of Carnegie Mellon against the Presidents of Washington and Jefferson. 55-52 final. Presidents over Carnegie Mellon in double overtime. That's a game that had over 1,000 yards of offense between both teams. Actually, over 1,100 yards of offense between both teams. What a fantastic football game that was, and good for W&J for pulling it out.
Yeah, game of the year, by far, in my opinion, through this point in the season. And W&J being down 14 points in the fourth quarter and coming back to tie the football game and winning it in double overtime. For the Presidents, the margin for error is so slim for the rest of the season. They can't afford to lose another game if they want to get into that Division III football playoff. And I do want to touch on our Waynesburg University Yellow Jackets. A 10-9 win over Geneva. No passing yards allowed. Geneva only 4 dropbacks. But this Waynesburg defense picked up the offense 3 separate times in the first quarter following interceptions. I think it's fair to say that front 7 and that defense is legit as far as one of the better defenses that you'll find in the PAC. But let's put that week to bed, take a look at this week's matchups, and we'll begin with what is a 1 o'clock kickoff in Cleveland. The Teal Tomcats coming off of a bye at Case Western Reserve. Case 5-0, 4-0 in PAC play. Teal 2-3, 1-2 in PAC play. This game last year, Case Western beat Teal 41-6. The score was just 7-6 Case after 1 quarter. Case Western went on to score the final 34 consecutive points. Rob Kuda, 250 yards, 3 touchdowns through the air, another 91 yards and a touchdown on the ground. And Case Western doubled Teal in yards from scrimmage, 508 to 245. So Teal coming off a bye week, last action against W&J in week 5, a 62-14 loss. Case has been the most dominant team in the PAC at this point in the season. Their most difficult game on the schedule are in its last 2 weeks when they're at Westminster and at home against CMU in the Academic Bowl. Dominant against Bethany this week. I'll open it up to you, gentlemen. What do we see in this matchup?
Well, Case Western atop the PAC, as you said, really the strongest team in President's Athletic Conference play so far this season, and coming off a 23-point win against Bethany. Best scoring defense in the PAC, only allowing 13.2 points per game, so a team that really just allows 2 touchdowns being scored per game. That is a hard team to beat. And then best total defense in the PAC, allowing under 250 yards. Opposing offenses can't do much against these guys, as you can see. And then the rushing attack for Case Western, the best rushing offense in this conference, 282 yards a game. And then you bring in Rob Kuda, who might be the best player in this conference. This season, 920 yards, 8 touchdowns through the air, 407 yards and 8 touchdowns on the ground, just 5 interceptions. It's
really funny to look at Rob Kuda, especially his numbers from last year where he threw 26 touchdowns, was first team all-conference in multiple conferences. And this year, you have the numbers there, Donnie. He's thrown more interceptions already through this point in the season. He didn't throw his first interception until week 7, week 8 last year. Like, he hasn't been asked to go out and really win games. They've been so good defensively and running the football as well.
Yeah, it's just weird because by his numbers last year, you look at Rob Kuda and say, this guy's having a down year, but he's still having a pretty good season.
Super productive.
16 total touchdowns, just 5 interceptions. But the guy I want to highlight, the guy that's leading the PAC when it just comes to in-conference play and rushing, that's Jacob Burke. Had a huge game against Waynesburg a few weeks back. 78 carries this season, 610 yards, and 9 touchdowns, averaging over 150 yards a game. He's really been a key component in this Case Western offense, and he'll continue to be a key the rest of the season.
And as you mentioned, they're not asking Rob Kuda to do as much as they did last year, and the emergence of Jacob Burke is one of those reasons. He averaged last week 193 yards on 22 carries. He averaged 8.8 yards per carry, and that's not a small sample size. 22 touches in a game is a large sample size. And Sam Benger, who's been probably easily the best running back.
He's the premier back in this league.
Jacob Burke is certainly catching up to him with these lofty numbers he's putting in week in and week out lately. And Case Western can dominate the clock the way they have been, and just really playing a physical style of football that's not as flashy as it was last year, but it's certainly getting the job done. You can't argue with the results. And I mean, that's pretty much the big storyline out of that team I see this year. Rob Kuda not being asked to do as much. Jacob Burke really taking over as one of the premier rushers in the PAC.
I'll take a look at Teal, a team coming off its bye week. Last action against W&J, that was a fresh team as well. So I'm not sure how much we can look into that football game. Ryan Radke passing for 172 yards, a couple of touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Gained 75 yards on the ground before he ended with 48 net rushing yards. One thing that really impressed me out of this Teal offense, and I'm sort of looking for a little bit more, it had an 18-play, 69-yard touchdown drive in the third quarter that lasted 8 minutes and 42 seconds. It had multiple fourth down conversions, 2 third down conversions, ended with a touchdown pass to Jaquan Hitz. Teal won time of possession 34.5 minutes to 25.5 minutes, but that was largely because W&J scored so quickly. The Presidents outgained Teal 601 to 283, 8 yards of play versus 4 yards of play for the Tomcats, and 7 of 8 touchdown drives lasted fewer than 2 minutes. Good news for Teal. It's not W&J in that passing attack. Bad news for Teal. It's Case Western in the running game, and if Case does anything well, it's run the football, stop the run. You guys have already highlighted Jacob Burke being one of the top rushers in the PAC this season. Donnie, you mentioned the defensive numbers in terms of scoring defense and total defense. Third down defense. Case Western's arguably the best third down team in the league, offensively and defensively, and they haven't even played, but at this point they haven't played the offensive juggernauts. They played Bethany, Waynesburg, Grove City, 3 of the bottom four teams, 3 teams all breaking in new quarterbacks. That is not the case against Teal, but we'll see if Ryan Radke and company can get it done. I like what Teal has done in terms of surrounding Radke with some more weapons. Teal leads the PAC in yards per completion at over 15.9 yards per completion. Radke now has Deshaun Bracey averaging almost 20 yards a catch. Jaquan Hicks, 18 yards a catch. Eugene Bailey, 15.5 yards a catch. Bracey's the top target on the team, but Bailey and Hicks have both had 100-yard games. And Radke, 7th in rushing, 85 yards per game, but under 100 yards the last 2 weeks after going over 100 the week before. And it's a tall order for this Tomcat team. And I do want to highlight for Case Western Reserve, Cameron Brown, sophomore defensive end, is your PAC Rookie of the Week. Career-high 10 tackles, 3 solo, 2.5 tackles for loss, and half a sack to go with 1 pass defended. And this whole front, essentially, for Case Western is brand new, and they've been phenomenal. Last week, the Bison were just 1 of 15 on third down against Case. Teams just don't move the ball in this defense. And here's the scary thing about Case Western. The offense turned the ball over 4 times, converted 2 of 12 third downs, and then still possessed the ball for 36.5 minutes. Rob Kuda threw 2 touchdowns, lost a fumble, and it just didn't matter because of how dominant the defense was. Let's head to our next matchup. It's the Westminster Titans traveling to the Grove City Wolverines. Kickoff in Grove City at 1:30. Westminster 4-1 overall, 2-1 in PAC play. Grove City still searching for that first win. In 2015, Westminster won this matchup 45-7. The Titans led 28-0 after the first quarter. Paul Colombo ran for 3 touchdowns, had a passing touchdowns. Dominic McKinley, 101 yards and a touchdown. Caleb Jakiel for Grove City went 4 for 30 passing, 25 yards, 4 interceptions. For this Westminster defense, that is insane. Just to go back and look at those numbers, Grove City gained only 108 yards from scrimmage. 64 of those yards came on the final 2 drives. You want to talk about lights out. That's what this Westminster defense was last year. Westminster bounced back this past week from a loss to Thomas More to beat St. Vincent, a team that was trying to take Westminster's spot as a top 4 team in the PAC. We knew what we were going to get from Westminster's defense, but the offense impressed me last Saturday. for Westminster, putting up 37 points. Demetrius Bentley, Don McKinley, Paul Colombo, all having nice days. And on the other side, Grove City lost to the highest-ranked team in the PAC, Thomas More, 70-20 last Saturday. And the game was scoreless through the first quarter. A good game plan for Grove City, possessing the football. But after Grove City got down to the Thomas More 22 and turned it over on downs, the Saints scored on their 7 of the next 8 drives, 7 touchdowns. So, gentlemen, Grove City, still looking for that first win, but a tall order against a good Westminster football team.
Yeah, it doesn't get any easier for Grove City coming into this week, losing by 50 points a week ago against Thomas More. But this Grove City team last in the PAC in scoring defense, giving up nearly 50 points per game, giving up over 500 yards per game, and also allowing the most sacks in PAC play. Brett LaFoon, he's had his struggles in his freshman season, but, I mean, 31 sacks, he is getting rushed around back there. But, I mean, this season, over 1,000 yards, 5 touchdowns, but he's turning the ball over a little bit too much, 9 interceptions. You look at the bright spot for Grove City, Wesley Schools, 130 carries, 610 yards, 5 touchdowns.
He's a top 5 rusher.
He's averaging over 100 yards per game, so that has to be something that Grove City's happy about. And then moving over to the Westminster side of things, Don McKinley's a guy who looks like he's gotten things going now in 2016. He was slow out of the gate first couple of weeks, but now these last 2 weeks, he's had consecutive 100-yard games and has scored 2 touchdowns in each game. And that's coming against Thomas More and St. Vincent. No slouches in the PAC, especially
Absolutely.
when you talk Thomas More. And McKinley on the season, now 444 yards and 4 touchdowns. And as I said, all 4 of those coming in the last 2 games. So he's a guy, if this team can get going, can really be a key the rest of the way.
He's a 1,300-yard rusher from last season. There's no one doubting his ability to be productive or his talent, and it's not a surprise to see him get back on track.
Yeah, one thing I want to mention about Westminster in the game they played last weekend against St. Vincent was the passing game. Paul Colombo had as perfect a game as Paul Colombo can have. 23 of 32, 276 yards, 3 touchdowns, no picks. And then he also, he didn't get sacked that many times. He wasn't dancing behind the line. It was an extremely efficient game for Paul Colombo. And as you guys mentioned, the weapons that they have at Westminster, there were a ton of guys who chipped into the offense, both in the receiving game and the rushing game, and they really like to spread the ball around, and that's a dangerous formula when you have guys who can't be double covered, and they have a ton of weapons, and their defense played great once again, pretty much shut down. They did score 22 points, but Derek Stewart has been a solid quarterback in the PAC this year. Those are going to happen. They still held Stewart to only 165 yards of passing, which is fairly solid for this Westminster defense. He did throw 2 touchdowns, but 15 to 24 and 165 is not the kind of game that Derek Stewart can have.
He entered the week as the leading passer in the PAC.
Exactly. So, they really did a nice job of keeping him contained. And as for Grove City, you can't help but feel bad for them. I mean, had to travel to Thomas More, which might be the most difficult place to play in the PAC just because of the location. Yep. And, of course, the team is one of, if not the best team in the conference as well. They moved the ball fairly well, 22 first downs. They still picked up 354 yards of offense against an extremely stingy Thomas More defense. I'm not quite sure how much of that was in garbage time as some of the starters were filtered out of the game, but this is tough for Grove City. Westminster is still a top-tier team in the PAC, and it's going to be a tough matchup for Grove City. Very difficult for them to pick up the first win of the season.
Yeah, a big loss for Grove City, losing Brett LaFoon in the second quarter of last week's game against Thomas More with an injury. Caleb Jakiel came in and finished the game, passed for 200 yards, 3 touchdowns in that game. Nick Kapanikvar catching 2 of those touchdowns, Gabe Greco catching the other one. Hopefully LaFoon will be able to go again this week and the rest of the season, because for Grove City, I'd say this year, unlike some of the years past, they have found their guys who can really be the program the next couple of years, and LaFoon was one of those guys. Panikvar, Wesley Schools, as mentioned before, are those guys. I'll say this about the Wolverines. The schedule's been brutal outside of the home opener and homecoming. losing to Juniata by just 5, Waynesburg by 4. The other games, it's just been a who's who of who are the best teams in the conference. Case, W&J, St. Vincent, Thomas More. And maybe St. Vincent doesn't belong in that category yet, but offensively, I think they absolutely do. Brendan, you referenced the defensive numbers for Grove City. They're not pretty, but in the games against Waynesburg and Juniata, the defense played well enough to win both of those games or be in both of those games at the end of the line. Unfortunately for them, it doesn't get easier with Westminster this week, but to close the season at Geneva, at Bethany, against Teal, you could see a win in there. And this is a team that's turned the ball over more than anyone, allowed 31 sacks in 6 games, which is 10 more than any other team, last in scoring total, pass, and third down defense. I think you'll definitely see improvement. And listening to Coach DiDonato speak with Commissioner Onderko, on Commissioner Onderko's podcast as well, he said he saw incremental improvement, and he's seeing improvement every week. It's just hard when you play the best teams in the conference week after week after week. And for Westminster, I'd say that game against St. Vincent, offensively, you mentioned the passing numbers, Brendan. Amazing. Exactly what you're looking for Colombo. Didn't turn the football over, passed effectively. Bentley had a long touchdown at the beginning of the game. They had 3 drives of at least 70 yards that went for touchdowns. That really ate up time. They had 1 8-minute drive, and then they scored 10 points coming off fumbles in St. Vincent territory and a partially blocked punt. Held the ball for 41 minutes. And held St. Vincent to 60 yards on the ground, Derek Stewart to 165, St. Vincent 3 for 10 on third down. 22 points look like a lot against Westminster's defense, but St. Vincent got a late garbage time score. What I love about Coach Benzel's team is the fact that Westminster refuses to beat itself. 6 giveaways all season, Paul Colombo just 2 interceptions. Colombo's been productive enough, the 6th leading passer in the PAC. The defense is allowing 17 points per game, under 300 yards per game, the best pass defense in the conference. This Westminster team, I know we've got plenty of teams. I know we've got Case and Thomas More vying for a conference title, W&J trying to get an at-large bid. But some of those teams have to travel to Westminster, and I don't think those games are gimmies against the Titans. So we shall move on from Grove City and Westminster and get into our next matchup, one that we're very familiar with. The Thomas More Saints traveling to Waynesburg University to take on the Yellow Jackets. That a 1:30 kickoff at John F. Wiley Stadium. The Saints ranked number 14 in Division III, 5-1 overall, 4-0 in the PAC. Waynesburg 2-4 overall, 2-2 in the PAC. However, the Jackets riding a 2-game win streak into this contest. Last year, Thomas More beat Waynesburg 42-13, led that game 35-0 before Waynesburg finally got on the board. Brendan Kunst played in that game for an injured Jensen Gebhardt, threw for 300 yards, 4 touchdowns with an interception. Javier Pitts over 100 yards on the ground. Goose Cohorn a couple of touchdowns for Thomas More. Waynesburg had just one player with over 35 yards from scrimmage against the Thomas More defense, and that was Jerry Lawman, who ran for 137 yards. He is no longer with the Jackets following graduation. Waynesburg couldn't pass on this tough Thomas More front. Only 96 pass yards, 3.3 yards an attempt. One of the lowest passing totals for Jake Doherty in his early career. Thomas More set the PAC scoring mark for this season with a 70-20 win over Grove City. Game was scoreless through the first quarter. Thomas More scored a program record 35 points in the second quarter. Waynesburg, on the other hand, beat Geneva in the lowest scoring game this season, 10-9. Wasn't really a surprise because both of these teams aren't high-flying offenses. Geneva running the triple option, Waynesburg with a really strong defense. Game was scoreless through the first half. 7 total turnovers in this game. All 10 of Waynesburg's points came on short fields directly off Geneva fumbles. The touchdown drive for the Jackets started on the Geneva 27. The field goal drive on the Geneva 21. Kevin Barnes scoring the lone touchdown for Waynesburg. So, Jackets, Thomas More. Here's the matchup.
Well, you mentioned Jerry Lawman having a good day last season against Thomas More, so I guess I'll start there and say that Waynesburg has the worst run offense in the PAC in 2016, averaging just 77 yards per game. Looking at the totals from some of these guys, the main runners, Chad Walker, 158 yards on 47 carries, no touchdowns. Whitney White, 43 carries, 150 yards, 1 touchdown. And Aaron Jenkins, a guy that we've seen play at quarterback. He started against Geneva, played the whole game, 24 carries, 99 yards, and 1 touchdown. And this porous rushing attack doesn't bode well against a team in Thomas More that is second in the PAC in run defense, giving up under 85 yards per game. So this is a spot where Waynesburg might have to look to the air, using either Tyler Perrone or Aaron Jenkins. And on Waynesburg's side of things, you have to rush the passer. Waynesburg is tied for second in the PAC in sacks with 19 as a team, and 7 of those are coming from the man that is second in the PAC in individual sacks. That's Brad Grinnan. Second best team in pass defense in the President's Athletic Conference, and that is a lot of that help goes to last week against Geneva, where they didn't allow a single pass yard.
A 0 will help your average there.
Yeah, so the Yellow Jackets allowing under 150 yards per game through the air. And another thing that sticks out to me for this Waynesburg team, second best red zone defense in the PAC, allowing opponents to score under 70% of the time. That could be a key in this game, that getting in the red zone against the Yellow Jackets is no guarantee, but we'll see how it plays out.
We knew in this game last week against Geneva that the story of the game was going to be the Waynesburg front seven defensively against Geneva's triple option. And as you mentioned, Andy, it was exactly the type of game that we expected, very low scoring, a game that hinged a lot on turnovers, and both teams had their fair share of turnovers. Waynesburg had some momentum going, 3 consecutive drives in the opening half that ended in interceptions, even though Jenkins and the offense started to move the ball around well, and that's something they cannot do against Thomas More, because Thomas More, unlike Geneva, certainly has the firepower to make you pay every time that you turn the ball over. So that is a huge thing that Rick Shepis needs to keep an eye out for this week of practice and in the game. And as for Thomas More, there's just not much you can really say at this point other than they're just beating everyone however they want to. Brendan Kuntz has had a phenomenal year, 19-27 last week, 272 yards, 5 touchdowns. I mean, he did throw 2 picks, but when your defense is as good as it is, it's going to happen if you're going to gunsling. And then Javier Pitts, 79 yards on the ground. They have a bunch of guys who had over 30 yards rushing, 5 to be exact. 3 of them had at least 60 yards of rushing, and they can just spread the ball around. Dalen Garland is one of the best receivers in the PAC, and he was even outshined by Logan Winkler this week, who had 7 receptions and 105 yards, 2 TDs. It seems like it seems like there's just a new guy every single week who can contribute a big game for this Thomas More team, and that may be the secret to their offensive success. And so, I mean, if Waynesburg wants to win this game, turnovers cannot happen, and period. And then the defense is going to need to pull out an extreme effort, and then the offense that is by far the most anemic in the PAC is going to have to figure out something to get going.
The Logan Winkler point there, his brother, Ryan Winkler, was a 2-time All-PAC wide receiver, which the Winkler name very familiar there, had 7 catches, 100 yards, 2 touchdowns a week ago. For Waynesburg, Donnie, you touched on the running game. It's so hard when you lose your starting quarterback and you're playing with guys making their first and second career starts with Tyler Perrone and Aaron Jenkins these last few weeks, and not having a run game, especially in the red zone. You referenced the Jackets' red zone defense. I want to talk about the red zone offense last week, and I know Coach Shepis was extremely, extremely unhappy with the effort he got out of his guys. 1 for 3 in the red zone, 1 field goal. That field goal on a drive that started 1st and goal from the 1-yard line. And in order to beat any team, they were able to get away with it against Geneva. And that defense had a great game, still had to get a stop at the end of the game. But that cannot happen against a team like Thomas More. The way I see it, for Waynesburg, the formula, make it a low-scoring game. The offense doesn't have the firepower to get into a shootout with Thomas More. That happened against Westminster, where the Saints put up 28 points very early. And Thomas More has had some struggles this year offensively. You look to when they played W&J. Offense went scoreless the full first half. CMU limited Thomas More to just 20 points. Grove City went through a scoreless first quarter with Thomas More. However, this Thomas More team has had 4 different games where it scored at least 20 points in a quarter. Waynesburg has only scored 20 points in 1 football game all year. Waynesburg can't let things rain and then pour on the Jackets, and as you guys mentioned, turnovers are critical when it comes to to those momentum plays. Thomas More, it's very easy. Top 3 offense, top 3 defense. Great wins over W&J, CMU at Westminster. Last week, the Waynesburg defense was probably the best unit on the field against Geneva. Just that much better than Geneva's defense because they were put in tough spots because of turnovers. Thomas More's offense, Thomas More's defense both have a chance to be the best unit on the field. And certainly a tall task for any team, let alone these Yellow Jackets. But we will move on to our second to last matchup with the Bethany College Bison visiting the Washington and Jefferson Presidents. This a 6 o'clock kickoff at W&J Cameron Stadium. Last year, W&J won this matchup in a shootout, 66-42. Pete Coughlin, 202 yards, 3 touchdowns, a rushing touchdown. Ryan Ruffing ran for 3 touchdowns. Lincoln Reyes of Bethany passed for 4 touchdowns and also 4 interceptions. Eric Blinn caught 3 of those touchdowns, had 146 receiving yards. Jalen Holmes went for 180 yards on the ground and 2 touchdowns. W&J led 51-21 entering the fourth quarter. 59-21 entering the fourth. Bethany scored 3 touchdowns in the fourth quarter to make it seem closer. And the Bison actually outgained W&J 464 to 460. But 5 turnovers will kill you as they killed the Bison last year. And Bethany, latest victims of Case Western losing 37-14 last season. And like everyone else, weren't able to run effectively against Case. 70 yards on 1.9 yards an attempt. And they weren't able to stop Case in the run game. Case 327 yards and almost 6 yards in attempts. The offense, 1 for 15 on third down, interception in the red zone. On the other side, W&J beat CMU in double overtime. My vote for game of the year so far. CMU led 42-28 with 10:37 to go in regulation. W&J got the ball in midfield thanks to a Luke Merhont return. The President's 5 plays, 50 yards, touchdowns. Coughlin to Brandon Toy. CMU 3 and out. W&J punt. CMU 3 and out. W&J takes over on its own 40. 6 plays later, 30-yard touchdown pass to Jesse Zubik. In overtime, W&J scored first. CMU responded. Double overtime, CMU got the ball first. First and goal from the W&J 4-yard line. Benger no gain. Benger gain of 2. Benger loses yard. Field goal. W&J takes over. 3rd and 7 from the CMU 8. Coughlin finds Zubik in the right corner to win the game. Pete Coughlin, 7 passing touchdowns, 1 rushing touchdown, 451 total yards of offense. And he is your PAC Offensive Player of the Week. And on the other side, Donovan Hayden, last week for Bethany, 19 tackles, 3 for loss, a sack, 2 forced fumbles, and an interception for a touchdown. I'd say this was the easiest Offensive and Defensive Player of the Week awards perhaps the PAC has ever handed out. But for the Bison, a big task against W&J this week.
Yeah, and I want to look at a star wide receiver. The Bison that team was used to Eric Blinn the past few years, but now they have to go up against the Presidents, and wide receiver Jesse Zubik leads the PAC in receiving 50 receptions, 781 yards. That's an average of 156 yards a game, 12 touchdowns, which is tied for the lead with Sam Benger of Carnegie Mellon for touchdowns on the season. And just last week against Carnegie Mellon, 17 receptions, 201 yard, 4 touchdowns.
Now, if Pete Coughlin didn't throw all of those touchdowns, it would have been an easy week for Zubik to win Offensive Player of the Week. That was the caliber of week that this offense had.
Yeah, it has to be one of the best performances out of a wide receiver.
In WJ and in conference history, absolutely.
Yeah, and then you look at Pete Coughlin's numbers, and he has led the PAC all season in passing yards per game, passing efficiency, and also total yards per game. And W&J, just a powerhouse offense that averages almost 50 points a game. This is a very tall task for the 1-5 Bethany Bison.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing, though. When Pete Coughlin plays a perfect game, it's very tough to compete with W&J, and CMU did, though. You know, CMU, you have to give credit to CMU, but I'm going to look at W&J a little bit more, and I'm going to look at the rushing game. Austin Kemp turned in a phenomenal performance, and I think his performance gets lost a little bit with the 4 touchdowns by Zubik and the incredible game, both rushing and passing by Coughlin. But Austin Kemp, you know, W&J's been looking for that guy to take over in the running game since Ruffing graduated last year, and he did a great job this past week. 25 rushes, 159 yards, and I mean, that's phenomenal to be able to have that dual threat system with both the passing as well as the running. So I think that's huge for W&J to get the running game going a little bit. And, that's really what I have to say about W&J. But, I mean, what a tremendous game that was. As you said, game of the week. And that's...
Game of the year.
Maybe. So that's pretty crazy. And as for Bethany, once again, I said this last week. I know I did. But they are extremely difficult to figure out. We were very high on Chase Keenman throughout this season. He's been one of the bright spots, but he regressed a little bit. Granted, very good Case Western defense, but 8-20 for 77 yards, 49 of which coming on one play and an interception. He did throw a touchdown, but that is not the kind of game that Bethany would have liked to see out of him. Tyler Ambush is playing a little bit better, 5 catches, 74 yards, and he did have the 49-yard reception, so he's still he can be a playmaker. But really a regression for Bethany this week. They only got 8 first downs the entire day, and if your team can't put up points, it's going to be very difficult to stick with now a 3-headed monster when you add Kemp into the mix with Coughlin and Zubik and that entire W&J offense.
Bethany is right now in the middle of a 5-game stretch in which they play Westminster, at CMU, Case Western, at W&J, and at Thomas More. That's a murderer's row in the PAC, if I've ever heard one. And for these Bison, defensively, a lot of positives to take out of the Case Western game. Held Case to 2 for 12 on third downs, which is the best third down team in the PAC going into that game. Had 4 takeaways, 2 fumbles, 2 interceptions, a red zone stop, 3 fourth down stops. Even though they were on the field 36.5 minutes, of course, Donovan Hayden's been outstanding for years for the Bison. He's not surprising anyone with a phenomenal performance. Colin Johnson, an interception with a 63-yard return. The defense gave up 37 points, but Case has scored at least 35 points in every game. You must score to beat, I've said it week after week after week on this podcast, you must score at least 30 points to beat Case, and holding that offense to 37 points, that's almost as good as you're going to get against that team this year. The Bethany offense had just 147 yards from scrimmage. The defense on interception returns alone put up 111 return yards. So offensively, it was a challenge, granted. It is a Case Western Reserve defense. That's amazing. But let me reiterate for W&J, the stakes are the same for every game the rest of the year. They have to win just to get a chance to get into the D3 football players. That's something that can get complicated if Thomas More and Case runs to the table. Then we'll get to tiebreakers to see who gets the automatic bid and if the other team gets in. And for Coach Sirianni and that group, they can control what they can control. That is Bethany this week, followed by at Westminster, St. Vincent, Geneva, and at Waynesburg. I know at Westminster, that's a game that looms, but they have to take care of this game first. Pete Coughlin, 300 yards a game passing, first in the conference, 66-yard completion percentage, best among starters, 24 touchdowns in 5 games. Rob Kuda led the PAC in touchdowns last year with 28 for the whole season. He's been insane. He's had a wonderful career at Washington and Jefferson, and I know he doesn't want to end this regular season and have that be his final game. They certainly do want to return to the D3 football playoffs. But let's go to our final matchup with our featured team of the week, Carnegie Mellon, traveling to the Geneva Golden Tornadoes. Reeves Field, 7 o'clock kick, where low-key, Geneva, both of their wins are this year. CMU 2-3, 2-2 in the PAC. Geneva 2-3, 1-2 in the PAC. Last season, CMU beat Geneva 35-7. Sam Benger, 194 yards rushing, 2 touchdowns. Andrew Herron ran for a pair of touchdowns. And Geneva's Aaron Channing, not a great day passing the football, 12 for 27, 142 yards, an interception without a touchdown. But every week, it's a completely different look for Geneva this season as opposed to last season. CMU sitting here at 2-3 with overtime loss to Washington in a game in which the Tartans led 21-0, a loss at Thomas More 20-16, a loss at W&J 55-52 in overtime or double overtime. I won't let the 2-3 record fool you. And talking to Coach Sirianni before the matchup with W&J, he thought CMU played well enough to beat Thomas More. I'll say this though, Geneva's not a gimme if they're able to play their football game and they don't give the game away like they did last week against the Yellow Jackets.
And they're 2-0 at home this year as well.
2-0 at home this year as well. We'll jump right into it. Geneva, W&J.
All right, I'll jump in. Geneva they faced a very tough front seven in Waynesburg. Waynesburg did a fantastic job of shutting them down. And really, here's the thing, though. Turnovers. And we've said this all season long with Geneva. They put the ball on the ground 4 times, and Waynesburg was able to recover all 4 times. And even with a team like Waynesburg that isn't the greatest on offense, when you turn the ball over 4 times, you're flirting with disaster. And Waynesburg was with that with a field goal late in that game. Waynesburg, even though they didn't move the ball, was able to kick a field goal.
Both scoring drives started inside the Geneva 30, and that's a margin for error for even a really good Geneva defense.
You can't blame this Geneva defense on anything that happened. It was the offense that was just shut down by Waynesburg, and then the turnovers as well. And another thing is the offense wasn't able to capitalize on 3 interceptions back to back given up by Waynesburg in the first half.
In the first 3 drives of the game.
Exactly. And so you look at the total yards, 251 yards rushing. That just happens to be their total for the game as well. And Waynesburg slightly better at 265. Geneva is extremely tough at home, but they're going to need more offensive production. And I think it's kind of strange because sometimes we've seen this Geneva team have those big play abilities. They scored 21 points against Bethany in the fourth quarter of that game. Mm-hmm. They put up big numbers in other games.
35 against Teal, 21 against St. Vincent as well.
Exactly, and that's exactly where I'm getting at. I think if 21 of those points against Teal was in the first quarter even. Mm-hmm. And so they have the ability to be big play, but the consistency just wasn't there this week, and that's going to be extremely tough if they don't get the ball moving against against Carnegie Mellon. And Carnegie Mellon, once again, as you mentioned, Andy, absolutely good enough to win again against W&J, another powerhouse in this conference. You could make the argument that CMU could have wins under its belt against Thomas More and WJ in the same season, and that's really not that far off. In fact, Carnegie Mellon, a lot of things had to go incorrectly once again for them to lose against W&J this past week. They were up 2 scores in the fourth quarter, and that's kind of been their storyline all season long, not being able to finish out close games. And that's something that if Geneva can get a close game, a close battle with Carnegie Mellon, Geneva is always very good at home, 2-0 this season, under the lights. I think you mentioned this, Donnie, last week on the broadcast, is that they have the highest, in all of D3 football, they have the highest attendance per week.
They're in the top 5.
Top 5. I mean, that's a really good atmosphere for Geneva to play at home. And Austin mentioned this last week when he was on, that CMU has a tendency to play with their opponent. If CMU plays offensively the way they had against Waynesburg, that game is not only a 12-point game. They really played W&J well. They played Thomas More well, but they somewhat struggle when playing lesser teams in the conference. I don't know if that's just like a psychological block, or maybe it's not even a thing at all. It just happens to be a coincidence. But I think this is going to be a really good game, especially if Geneva's defense can slow down Sam Bender a little bit.
This is a game I like to look at the running backs. We have 2 of the top 3 running backs in the PAC when it comes to yards per game. Sam Bender, you have to start with him. He leads the President's Athletic Conference in total rushing and in yards per game. He has 833 yards this season and 11 touchdowns. He's averaging over 166 yards a game. Also tied with Jesse Zubik of Washington and Jefferson in total touchdowns with 12. And he also leads the PAC in all-purpose yards with 874. And then I look at the other side, Trayvon Marshall. He's a guy coming into this game, 94 carries, 544 yards. That's over 108 yards per game. He has 4 touchdowns on the season. But last week against the Waynesburg University Yellow Jackets, Marshall held to just 68 yards, and that bumped him from second to third when it comes to leading rushers in the PAC. And Geneva, of course, a team that runs this triple option. But CMU, something that team can't capitalize on this week. The Tartans lead the PAC with 21 sacks as a team. Brian Corey leads in individual sacks with 8. Not going to get many chances at that this week. The triple option that Geneva runs, this team has thrown under 45 passes this year and have 2 quarterbacks that can run the ball. Javed Ellis and Devin Koloski both have multiple touchdowns on the season. Ellis had 1 last week, and Koloski has 2 on the season. So CMU not going to be able to get a pass rush like it's normally able to do, but can really be able to win this game in other ways.
We'll see how that pass rush turns into being focused on the run game and how disciplined they can be. Assignment football is one thing you hear coaches say all the time about defending the triple option. And for CMU, I don't want to get away from the fact that they put up 52 points with their backup quarterback. Alex Klein passed for 285 yards, 3 touchdowns without an interception. John Prather was awesome again, 9 catches, 177 yards, a touchdown. Benjer ran 40 times for 160 yards, 3 touchdowns. And CMU, I was impressed. They were at a dangerous part of the game where they're down 14-3 to W&J. CMU went 3 and out, and then the defense picked up the offense, didn't allow W&J to convert once it got into CMU territory, and then Alex Klein comes in on his second drive. They march 88 yards for a touchdown, and then it's a game for the rest of the afternoon. Those are turning points within a game where you go 3 and out, down 14-3 against Jay, and if they score, all of a sudden it's a 3-score game. I was really impressed with the defense picking up the offense, but after that it was all offense. CMU scored right before the half thanks to an 82-yard return by William Richter, who's been awesome this year, to take a 28-21 lead. 2 key turnovers helped CMU out in the third quarter. Donnie, you mentioned Brian Corey. He sacked Coughlin in the red zone. Coughlin fumbled, recovered by Alex Staines. CMU goes 3 and out, punts. W&J fumbles on the return. CMU's offense is back on the field, 3 first downs. Sam Benjer with a touchdown to go up 35-21 in the third. And then in the fourth quarter, going up 42-28, W&J gets that punt from midfield. Defensive stops, scores, overtime. It's a loss, but offensively, putting up 500 yards, there you go for CMU. Getting a balance offensively, which is something Coach Lackner talked this week about, and the focus is huge. And finally, on the other side for Geneva, every drive, and Coach DeMarco stressed this to me, every drive he wants to end with a kick, be it a punt, be it an extra point, and turning the football over and compromising his defense really was the key in dropping this game. And I know that's something they'll work on extensively this week in Beaver Falls. Well, that's it for us this week here at the PAC Pregame Show. We've got another exciting week of PAC matchups. Next week, be sure to tune into the PAC Football Focus. We're talking to Dan Bloom, first-year coach at Teal College, here on PACathletics.org.